Thank you, and welcome to this evening's Planning South Committee. Just to check, can you hear me okay at the back? Jolly good. Which will be determining planning applications as per the agenda. Thank you for attending this evening. May I remind members of the public that this is a meeting held in public, but it is not a public meeting. Therefore, it's not a forum for the public to ask questions or challenge the points raised during debate by members of the committee and officers. Speakers who have registered to speak will be invited to do so by myself, but you must keep to the time that has been allotted for you. Okay. We are not expecting a fire drill today, so should you hear the alarm, please make your way to the nearest fire exits. There's one there, and I think the one behind me, and we assemble by the bandstand in the centre of Horsham. May I also remind council members and members of the public, switch off your mobile phones or switch them to silent. And when speaking, turn your microphone on, and when you finish, turn it off, as I often forget. I also remind everyone this evening that this committee meeting is being live streamed, and I would appreciate you if you behaved appropriately and accordingly. When voting, members, please can you raise your hands clearly so that we can capture an accurate vote. And I am Councillor Ellis Brown, and I shall be chairing this evening's meeting. But before we proceed with the agenda, I would like the officers to introduce themselves, starting with the officers on my right.
Good afternoon, Giles Holbrook, Senior Planning Officer.
Good afternoon, Adrian Smith, Major Applications Team Leader.
Jason Hawkes, Principal Planning Officer.
Emma Parks, the Head of Development and Building Control.
Claire Brown, Principal Planning Solicitor.
Laurel Tilbury, Committees Officer.
Thank you very much. Apologies for absence.
Thank you. So apologies for absence. We have Councillors Lynn Lambert, Mark Bainham, Emma Beard, John Campbell, Claudia Fisher, Joanne Knowles and Josh Potts.
Thank you. Item number 2, to approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I take these minutes as agreed? Thank you very much. Item number 3, declaration of members' interests. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? No? Okay. Announcements from myself, only one. As you can tell, I am here this evening on my own, without the Vice Chair, so if I miss you raising your hands or get the wrong sequence, apologies beforehand. Item number 5 is the appeals. These were circulated at the previous meeting, but they weren't in the committee's pack. But they are being made available now. Do we have any comments on the appeals? No? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item number 6. This is DC 232279, land north of the Rosary, Partridge Green. I would ask the officer to make the presentation, please.
Thank you. Since the report was published, additional letters and emails of objection have been received. One of the letters sets out that the transport assessment wrongly states that the site is served by 3 buses. It is only served by 1 bus, and this is a mistake. Notwithstanding this, the site is considered a sustainable location, taking into account the services available at Partridge Green, as outlined in the local plan review, settlement sustainability assessment, and also in the individual assessment of the site for allocation for the local plan review. A letter has also been received from a solicitor, which has been, I believe, sent to all councillors. The letter requests a site visit by the councillors and state that expert reports have been submitted which are not given due consideration in the officer's report. As stated in the report, all the independent reports that have been submitted have been fully taken into consideration and assessed by the relevant professionals at Horsham District Council and the County Council. The letter also refers to the legality of proposed legal agreement and water neutrality. In terms of making sure there is a correct amount of offsetting for this development, this would be secured via obligations and legal agreements in the event that permission is granted. Based on calculations, the proposal requires approximately 227 Saxon wheel properties to be fitted with a water-saving device to offset this proposal. It should be noted this is not a definitive amount. If more properties are required to offset this proposal, then these would need to come forward. This would be secured under the terms of the legal agreement. Saxon Weald would be a signatory to the agreement. The water saving fixtures would need to be installed prior to occupation of any of the dwellings proposed under this application. The legal agreement would also require the fixtures to be retained in perpetuity. As Saxon Weald have a large portfolio of properties within the Sussex North water supply zone, providing additional properties to cover the offsetting for this development would not be an issue. The legal agreement would be enforceable and includes a requirement for the water saving measures to be inspected if required. An agreement for the same requirements with Saxon Weald for offsetting has been agreed and approved under a separate application which has been through the necessary legal checks. The letter refers to policy compliance with policy 26 and 27 of the HDPF. This relates to development in the countryside and settlement coalescence. As stated in the report, in the officer's opinion, the proposed landscape impact and coalescent impacts are considered appropriate, taking into account the weight attached to the council's lack of a 5-year supply of housing and the presumption in favour of sustainable development. Officers do, however, acknowledge that this is a departure from the local plan for development in the countryside and is therefore contrary to policy 2, 4 and 26 of the HDPF in respect to the principle of development. Emails received also refer to concerns regarding the impact of the proposal on the retained TPO near the access and highway safety. The concerns raised do not bring up any new matters for consideration which are not already addressed in the report. So here we see the application site. The site relates to 2 fields located north of the Rosary and to the west of Church Road at Partridge Green. The site there is highlighted in red. This shows the 2 fields in aerial view. The site is divided east-west by a row of trees, some of them covered by TPOs. The site is mostly enclosed by trees and hedgerows with limited views from Church Road and the Downslink. Here we see the site adjacent to the Downslink to the west. A high-pressure mains gas pipeline runs along the Downslink. There are also trees covered by the TPOs within the site, as I said, within the central area and along the eastern boundary. This shows the relationship of the site within the built-up area, adjacent to the built-up area boundary Partridge Green to the north and south and east. The smaller settlements of Littleworth and Jolesfield are located to the north. So this photo is taken from the south of Church Road, looking north. The property to the left is part of the Rosary, which looks over the site. This photo is taken from the north, looking south on Church Road, and shows the site to the right there behind the trees and adjacent to an access to a neighbouring property. So these photos are taken from within the site and show the existing fields within the site. Proposal is for outline consent for 81 dwellings with all matters reserved except for access. The scheme proposes a new vehicle access onto Church Road, as can be seen here. The majority of the housing is to the southern part of the site, with the central trees retained and enhanced. To the north, housing is proposed to the northeast section, with an attenuation pond, play area and pumping station proposed to the northwestern area. This plan shows 2 pedestrian access to the southeast and western parts of the site to allow access to Partridge Green and the Downslink. This is the parameter plan for development. This shows the developable areas for the site. Councillors will note that the development areas are set within the site, mostly retaining the trees and hedgerows which enclose it. As outlined in the report, the site has an extensive planning history with recent applications for housing for this site. The last application refused in 2022 was for a similar layout as shown here and was refused for 2 reasons stated here, relating to the lack of a water neutrality solution and the lack of a legal agreement. These reasons for refusal and the previous scheme are a material consideration of the determinative application, taking into account that the current scheme is very similar to the previous review scheme. As originally submitted, the proposal included 2 access for pedestrians onto Church Road to the north and south. The vehicle access is not classed as pedestrian access as stated in the report in paragraph 6.38. This is an error. Due to safety concerns raised by highways, the northern access has been removed, leaving the southern access for pedestrians onto Church Road only. This is considered appropriate, taking into account the proximity of the site to Partridge Green as seen here. The southern access would provide a direct access to Partridge Green facilities and services. As such, the lack of a northern pedestrian access is not considered an issue. This slide shows proposed vehicle access with proposed sightlines. As stated in the report, highways are satisfied that this provides suitable and safe access to the site with adequate sightlines. The scheme is also considered appropriate in terms of traffic generation. As stated in the report, the Horsham's tree officer has objected to proposals, and these objections are noted. However, with the benefit of suitable methods of construction, such as manual excavation, to be supervised by an arboriculturist, it is felt, and as stated in the report, that the impact of the root protection area of the adjacent TPO will be minimal. These details are recommended to be secured by condition. As outlined in the report, the scheme is a departure from the current local plan. However, taking into account the weight attached to the lack of a 5-year housing land supply and the presumption in favour of sustainable development, the proposal is recommended for approval as required by the NPPF. This takes into account the lack of harm attributed to the scheme and its allocation in the upcoming Horsham District Local Plan. The scheme is therefore recommended for approval subject to consultation from Southern Gas Networks regarding its proximity to the gas pipeline, and a legal agreement to secure the following: provision of 40% affordable housing, provision to secure water neutrality offsetting measures, improvements to public rights of way, contribution for county for a monitoring fee for the travel plan, and provision of future maintenance of the and management of the LEAP and open space. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I invite the first speaker of this evening, Peter Freeman, and remind you, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
So this comes on automatically, does it?
I think it's on all the time, actually.
Okay. Just put my timer on, if I may. So I start at my convenience. Sure. For now, I'll focus on safety, but ask you to consider later my notes and reports on trees, landscape and visual impact, settlement coalescence, heritage, and ecology. Whilst I commissioned the reports, and you may question the validity of their conclusions, I think you'll find their professionalism is self-evident and the findings are sound. By contrast, too many of HDC's consultees make factual errors and omissions, and I fail to understand how their judgments can be given weight. Turning to the site access, I've sent you pre-app emails between the developer and county highways discussing which standards to use. Both hope to find ways of using shorter splays and want to massage data with a wet weather adjustment. NPPF policy doesn't get a mention. How is it right that the same highways officer who gave paid for pre-app advice is later HDC's consultee? For years after I first highlighted a multitude of errors, the northern pedestrian access has been shelved. Gledhill's agreed that wet weather adjustments are discredited and there's no sign of the 30 speed limit bedding in. Correctly adjusted 85th percentile data given by the applicant was 39.2 southbound and 43.4 to the north. That was the worst day, but by no means unusual. An appeal decision states that MFS uses the same parameters as DMRB for speeds over 37, yet Gledhill is in denial. His stance is irrational and dangerous. There's no pavement to the west and no controlled crossing. I believe the plans don't demonstrate visibility compliant with the data supplied, and worst of all, there's an access road without pavements, creating extreme danger and a site of dysfunctional design. Safe and suitable access for all users is not available, so these plans clearly breach policies 114 to 116 of the NPPF. I'm appalled your officers haven't brought this to your attention and that representation is habitually ignored. You too should be appalled.
Thank you. Okay, forgive me if I pronounce your surname incorrectly. Rod Giel, is it?
It's Gio.
Giel, okay, apologies.
It's okay, good afternoon. When considering new development, nothing should be more important than highway safety. So to myself and many other villagers who know the area well, the most controversial aspect of this application are the 2 proposed accesses. The site vehicle access is located on a left-hand bend and on an uphill gradient, near the crown of a hill as you travel along from north to south. A system of double white lines has been introduced along the length of the site frontage to warn of danger from the layout due to reduced visibility. For the 2016 application of the access, it was identically positioned and rejected owing to a series of safety issues being determined. The local highway authority commented at the time, "It appears that the site access issue will be difficult to resolve. We have a matching situation now, and the Highways Authority have failed to respond to a recent detailed technical report, which is highly critical of their proposals and the applicant's road safety audit." Two of the most important of the various issues are: one, the pedestrian access, which presents serious highway safety risks, particularly for vulnerable groups attempting to cross close to a blind crest and bend. And two, the proposition that the vehicle access can be used by pedestrians, yet no footways or crossing facilities are provided. This arrangement will lead to pedestrians walking within the carriageway, a significant and dangerous safety concern. The judgment of the Highway Authority must be questioned if they are satisfied that residents, specifically parents with children and pushchairs, the elderly with vision and/or walking difficulties, and the disabled in wheelchairs will be attempting to negotiate these hazards without risk. These arrangements are not consistent with policies 114 and 115 of the NPPF, and for these reasons alone, I urge you to refuse this application.
Thank you very much. Okay, Andrew Munton, please. You have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Chair, councillors, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak this evening. I'm Andrew Munton, Planning Director at Reside Developments, a local, award-winning, independent, high-quality developer. Reside Developments is a conscientious developer that constantly delivers high-quality, sustainable housing schemes across the South East. Members will be aware that this scheme has been before committee previously. On that occasion, the only reason for refusal was due to the scheme not being able to demonstrate water neutrality. Reside has worked hard to find a suitable solution where the remaining water savings needed to achieve water neutrality after the on-site measures is to offset the remaining requirement using credits from Saxon Weald, who are retrofitting their existing stock. This is the same solution that the Council approved at committee in December for Reside's South Water scheme. The scheme is therefore fully water neutral. Reside has continued to work tirelessly with your officers to create a high-quality development fitting of a beautiful village like Partridge Green. This site is a proposed allocation in the recently submitted local plan, and the site meets the emerging policy requirements set out therein. Our homes are sustainable, achieving a reduction in CO2 greater than national policy, and our schemes are all gas-free. Specifically, this scheme achieves more than 10% biodiversity net gain on the site. Reside takes its responsibilities seriously and listens to the local community. We've responded to detailed comments made on this application, including, for example, agreeing to a financial contribution to the improvement of a public right-of-way just to the north of the village, and removing the additional pedestrian access on Church Road. My colleague Chris will explain the scheme's benefits in more detail, but this development achieves water neutrality as agreed by Natural England. It's vital that we all work collaboratively together to deliver new homes that are in so much need in this district. I therefore ask that you endorse your officer's recommendation and approve this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David Green, please. Apologies, apologies, I jumped ahead of myself. Chris Lyons, sorry, Chris Lyons, please.
Oh,
sorry,
right,
I jumped
okay.
ahead of myself. Apologies.
Good evening, members. My name is Dr. Chris Lyons and I'm a planning consultant at SLR Consulting. This planning application before you has already been considered at great length and all of the technical issues fully assessed several times. The previous planning application was refused 2 years ago, and in that time there's been no significant change in the development plan in Horsham, with the same local plan still carrying weight. However, there has been a significantly increased demand for housing in the district. As you know, the Council's new plan is saying you are unable to meet this demand for new homes due to water neutrality. Therefore, we believe there's an imperative for any suitable site that has a water neutrality solution to be supported. As you've heard, this site does have a water neutrality solution. In terms then of whether this site is suitable, I refer you back to the previous scheme, which was refused for two reasons. The second was simply to secure the Section 106, and therefore the only substantive issue was the first reason relating to water neutrality. Both issues have now been addressed. The previous decision is a material planning consideration, and we do not believe the policies have materially changed in relation to the other points. The Council's report on that application considered all of the other technical issues and on balance was satisfied with the proposals. The report concluded that it is acknowledged that the need for additional housing in the Horsham district is pressing and that the provision of 81 homes on the edge of an existing settlement carries significant weight in favour of the proposal. Furthermore, the site is now a proposed allocation in the proposed local plan, which shows the Council accepts the site as a suitable one, including the late query relating to the Southern Gas Network. We believe the application as submitted was appropriate, but we've worked with your officers to make additional amendments where requested. You can see from the illustrative layout that 81 units can be achieved within an attractive and spacious setting, with a good buffer zone to the boundaries, meaning the scheme will be well contained and is a natural extension to the village. The scheme also contains a play area, good access to the downs linked for walking and cycling, and a large area of open space. We believe this will be a very attractive environment and one that will be popular with future development residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This time I hope to get it right. David Green. You have 5 minutes, Councillor Green.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. West Grinstead Parish Council is opposed to this application. It's the 5th such application we've had for this site. It's the 3rd for 81 dwellings. This application is virtually identical, certainly to the last one. The second application, which of the 5, which was for 101 dwellings, was withdrawn, but the others have all been refused, and that's despite the 3rd of them being taken to appeal. So what's different about this application? What distinguishes it from the last one, which was refused in July 2021? By then, HDC was already unable to evidence a 5-year supply, but it hadn't at that stage produced a facilitating appropriate development document. The other thing to have changed is that the applicant didn't have an offsetting strategy to counter water neutrality. It does this time by reason of the deal it's come to with Saxon Weald. The parish council's main concern ever since that first application has always been the safety of the access to the site. It has to be recognised that the site is on an incline and on a slight bend. It also has to be accepted that the site frontage to the B2135 is lined by a number of mature oaks subject to TPOs. This inevitably limits the visibility lines the developer would be able to achieve. At the time of the initial application, the speed limit on the B2135 past the site was 40 mph. Even the applicant's own review at the time indicated that adequate visibility could not be achieved. The planning officer, who was then Emma Parks, reported that to address the visibility issues, the applicant has suggested that the speed limit be lowered and traffic calming introduced on the B2135. However, both processes are subject to further statutory consultation processes, the outcomes of which cannot be guaranteed. The introduction of a change in speed limit itself would not ensure compliance. This is evidenced by the fact that the existing 40 mph speed limit is already being exceeded regularly. Safe access to and the delivery of the development itself should not be reliant upon measures that have no certainty in terms of their outcomes. Well, the speed limit was reduced from 40 to 30, but seemingly, though, this was of itself sufficient to satisfy highways concerns. There was no call for up-to-date traffic data. The applicant's still working on data obtained pre-pandemic. nor was there any call for traffic calming measures as mentioned in the earlier report. Reducing a speed limit doesn't of itself render a road safer. It'll only be safer if it causes drivers to reduce their speeds. How do you measure that? Surely you have to obtain up-to-date data. We do have that data. We have that data because we maintain a speed indicator device at the foot of Staples Hill, almost opposite the northern end of the site. So we know from this that 53% of traffic entering the village observes the speed limit, but only 14% of the outgoing traffic. Some of that traffic is going awfully fast. The fastest speeds recorded are 78 leaving the village and 87 entering it. We would therefore ask you to question the advice you've received from Highways and refuse this application. Alternatively, if you feel that you have to grant consent, we would ask that you consider imposing an additional pre-commencement condition along the lines of the development hereby approved shall not commence until traffic calming measures have been submitted to and approved by the local planning authority, to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, that traffic using the B2135 past the site observes the speed limit of 30 mph. The approved scheme will be implemented prior to the first occupation of the development. Otherwise, the major issue, and you have probably read about this in the local press, exercising Partridge Green at the moment, is the change to the 17 bus service between Horsham and Brighton. The only bus service the village enjoys. What's happening is that the service is being improved, if you pay attention to Stagecoach, unless you happen to live in Partridge Green. Under the new timetable, if you live in Partridge Green and want to take the bus to Horsham during the middle of the day, you're now going to have to take a bus south to Henfield and then change to a northbound bus that follows the A281 north and bypasses Partridge Green.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but you've had your 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, so yeah, in terms of the vehicle access, this is the same vehicle access proposed in the last two applications. There was a 2016 application with a similar access, and which was refused. But the main difference, as stated, was the speed limit, which at that point was 40 miles per hour, which has now been reduced to 30. So that is a significant change. And for the current application, the applicant has undergone all the relevant tests and requirements by the county, and the county have also looked at all the submitted surveys, and there was also a survey done in 2023 by the county itself, which is referenced in 6.37. So and those takes into account the independent survey submitted by the resident. So all that has been taken into consideration, and the access is, as in the previous applications, is considered appropriate with the appropriate sight lines, taking into account the speed limit in the 85th percentile, which is considered appropriate. So unfortunately, we have to, well, not unfortunately, but we have to give that significant weight to the county's highways comments. So yeah, that's.
Sorry to interrupt. I just missed those last couple of sentences. I didn't quite catch what you were saying. Can you just say that again?
I was just saying that the speed limit has now been reduced since the 2016 application from 40 to 30, which is a significant change, which is why that at that time that the access to the 2016 application was considered inappropriate. And now this application is considered appropriate, taking into account what's now before us, and taking into also account the 85th percentile, which has been taken in the surveys done by the applicant.
Okay, thank you. The local ward members are not here this evening, but Councillor Knowles has submitted a note which we read out this evening by the committee officer on behalf of Councillor Knowles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got the statement here from Joanne Knowles. As ward councillor, I've received many emails of concern about this application. The common themes are access, both road and the removal of much of the number 17 bus service. Before COVID, the number 17 was half hourly with evening and weekend provision. It was cut back hourly and no evening or Sunday service during COVID. Last month, late August, the new timetable was announced without consultation, cutting off the Partridge Green loop, so there is no direct route between Horsham between 9:30 a.m. and 7:47 p.m. Monday to Friday, and still no Sunday service. This is a result of cost cutting by Stagecoach and the village being excluded from the reinstated Sunday service provision funded by West Sussex County Council. The road access. We are aware that West Sussex Highways team have limited capacity and often raise no issues, and residents know that there may be serious implications to further access point and increased traffic. We must seek to reduce the chance of further accidents along this fast, busy road with visibility challenges and many access points. If it is possible to add a condition to see further traffic calming measures be included to reduce the speed of vehicles entering and leaving the village alongside the B2135, that would improve this application considerably. Thank you very much on behalf of Joanne Knowles.
Thank you very much. I now open this for debate amongst the members.
Could I
Councillor
ask
Fletcher.
whether, sorry, this was just point of order, was whether I could ask whether the officers had any comments on any of the things raised so far?
I did.
Well, in terms of the bus service, we recognise there is a limited bus service which is proposed to be amended. But as stated, we still feel this is a sustainable location for development, taking into account the location of the site close to some services within Partridge Green.
I was wondering whether you had a comment on the suggestion from Councillor Knowles and the member of West Grinstead Parish about the condition on traffic calming.
Well, we're guided by the highways on this, and they've not required traffic calming for this application as necessary. So it's not something we're requiring as part of the application.
And in any event, you can't just add a pre-commencement condition for traffic calming because we don't know whether it's feasible, what's possible, and ultimately it's outside of the red edge of the application site. So, you know, there are other means in which you potentially could secure it, but I think it's not as simple as that. But obviously, you know, in considering mitigation, you have to consider, is it necessary to make the development acceptable? And it's that key test which officers in the county obviously feel is not met, which is why we're not seeking to secure traffic calming as a result of this development. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Circus.
Thank you, Chairman. From time to time, I read the reports of officers that are tendered to us at these meetings. And frankly, there seems to be a misconnect between what the report says and what the recommendation is. It seems to me in many ways this report makes the case for rejecting the application. Certainly if you read some of the serious concerns of a number of the consultees, I'd just say something about highways. I hope my colleague, Councillor Dennis, won't be too cross with me. But the problem with county highways, and because of the enormous number of applications they get, these sort of comments from county highways are based on desk research. So what we have is the result of a desk research exercise versus the known experience of people who know this road and can see this road and have had experience of it over many years. What I wanted specifically to draw attention to was the letter we all had from a firm of solicitors called Richard Buxton, if I may, Chairman, which I thought was a cogently written and argued letter. And I wonder whether we could be told, I mean, this letter went, I think, to Lauren as head of legal services. In paragraph 9, it says, the involvement of a third party, that's Saxon Weald, of course, in the Section 106 agreement will not and cannot be sufficient. Unlike, of course, the actual developer who is directly party to the Section 106 agreement. And then the solicitor goes on to say there is no way of binding Sussex Weald's successors in title, nor is there any way of enforcing directly against the developer should there be any failure to deliver these offsetting measures after implementation. We've had an argument on a number of occasions, Chairman, about water neutrality in terms of is it water neutral and can it be seen to be water neutral in perpetuity? And in fact, that's the point that is made further on in the solicitor's letter. Now, I wonder whether, I mean, as I've understood the officer's comments on this aspect of water neutrality, it is tended to be, and I hope I'm not doing them an unfairness, if it's water neutral now, we can assume it will remain water neutral, which has always seemed to me a highly questionable proposition. Given that the conclusion, particularly as a result of those comments about water neutrality, that the solicitor who wrote this letter says that it would be unlawful for members to proceed, I wonder whether we could be told whether my learned friend, the monitoring officer, has actually responded. I know the letter was only received yesterday, so I do think that we ought to have a response. This is a solicitor who, a firm that clearly specialises in planning law, and here's a serious point about binding the successors in title to Saxon Weald. Seems to me, you know, given this point about in perpetuity, seems to me a very relevant point. I think we need some comfort, if I can put it like that, on that point before any of us would feel remotely content to agree to this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Serkis.
Councillor Serkis, thank you. I'll pass over to my legal colleague in a second, but first of all, we have seen the letter, and in fact my colleague's update, Jason's update, did include reference to that letter at the very beginning of the meeting, so all officers have read and considered that letter, and my legal colleague will talk about the details. Just before doing so, with reference to the comments in the report around any level of harm, I think all members will recognise, you know, an officer's report will always balance those matters, and quite often with the development there is a level of harm which the report will be explicit on. Obviously, what's key when you have an application such as this, which we consider water neutral, and when you're in a no 5-year housing land supply position, is as set out within paragraph 6.61, where any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So I think members need to be cautioned where there is reference to the report to any harm, that justifies a reason for refusal, because that is not the officer's view, and that is not the intention, and the report should be looked at as a whole and reference to the conclusions and the planning balance. I'll just pass over to my legal colleague now with regard to the water neutrality points. Thank you.
Yes, it's a technical question, so I'm afraid you're going to get a technical answer. I'm going to paraphrase section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act, and that will answer your questions. I'm going to do it fairly thoroughly so that no one steps out of this chamber having listened to this without understanding how it works. So we start off at subsection 1, which says that any person interested in land in the area of a local planning authority may enter into a planning obligation, and that includes Saxon Weald. And that can require specified operations or activities to be carried out in, on, over or under the land. So They can enter into the 106 agreement and they can bind their own land, and that they can enter into covenants that require them to carry out things like fitting flow regulators, taking out inefficient lavatory systems, fitting taps and so forth retrospectively to increase the efficiency of the water usage in their housing stock. So a planning obligation, I'm moving on to subsection 2 now, may impose any restriction or requirement mentioned either indefinitely or for such period or periods as may be specified. So we require that these covenants are entered into indefinitely. Now obviously if things change and the Natural England position is revoked or amended, then we will be happy to vary or even discharge the covenants that are entered into if perhaps there is a change in infrastructure provision or so forth. But we require these provisions to be entered into in perpetuity. And planning obligations are enforceable by us as the local planning authority. We have inserted clauses into our section 106 agreements which require that we can take more water meter readings and even obtain readings from water suppliers without necessarily having reference to the provider, so that so anyone with a water meter agrees to allow us to access their data. And the part about, in the letter about enforceability against the developer is rather a red herring, because if the offsetting measures were did not remain in place, it wouldn't be the developer that we would be enforcing against. It would be the offsetting land provider. So it would be Saxon Weald, because they would enter into the agreement just like the developer, and they would be subject to the covenants therein that they had entered into. And there's also this suggestion that there wouldn't be any way of these covenants being passed on to successors in title. But that's entirely contrary to the law. Because subsection 3 says that planning obligations are enforceable by the authority against the person entering into the obligation and against any person deriving title from that person. To put in layman's speak, if you buy a property from Saxon Weald, unfortunately you will be subject to the same obligations that they entered into before you, and so they are passed down. It's statutory. Now, Councillor Circus, as a lawyer, will probably know that in private covenants you can't pass on positive covenants, only negative ones, only restrictive ones. That's the rule in Tulchan Moxhay, if I remember rightly. But this is a statutory provision. It is different. It is here in black and white. So, does somebody want to get that? However, we can release persons from being bound by obligations once they've sold on their land, if they were not responsible in the first place. And finally, subsection 5, it talks about restrictions or requirements imposed under planning obligations are enforceable by injunction, which is a severe penalty and should provide adequate comfort that we have plenty of clout when it comes to making sure that water neutrality provisions remain in place. We take in a monitoring fee. We intend to make sure that until such time as water neutrality is no longer required, we can ensure that these provisions remain in place. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Can I just, so in other words, your advice is that this covenant is enforceable in perpetuity, even if there is a successor in title.
That is the statutory provision.
Right. Okay.
And if I just want to cover off one more point, that if there is, it might have occurred to you as a lawyer that perhaps some seek to offset against property outside our area. And that can be done using a provision of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1982, section 33, which basically allows similar enforceability provisions. So persons that are parties to an instrument under seal, so we're talking about people that basically enter into a deed. We can also carry out enforce provisions outside our area when it comes to the regulating the use of land. So we've got a dual enforcement tool here in the law. So I'm hoping that that provides you all of the comfort that you need, that we have statutory provision. I'm not quite sure how this letter seeks to put it, that wouldn't be the case, but we are quite satisfied. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just remind that you should have your phone turned to silent or turned off, please? Thank you. Councillor Croker. Oh, Councillor Croker. Sorry, I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Chair. It'd probably be remiss of me not to comment about Southern Water's statement that they can facilitate foul sewage disposal, despite the fact that in 2023 their local sewage works had 1,600 hours of storm overflows. However, leaving that aside for a minute, I'd like to go back to travel matters. Personally, I find it ridiculous is the wrong word, but it'll have to do that there is no footway adjacent to the sole vehicle access point to the site. Secondly, a couple of questions on access for pedestrians. Firstly, is there a dropped curb provision for the southern access point for pedestrians on both sides of the road? And the other question is access to the Downs link, which I'm not clear whether that is pedestrian only or includes cycles. So perhaps some clarification on that would be useful, please. Thank you.
Just in terms of the Southern Water, they have commented on the application and not raised any objections. And going forward, they would condition the details for drainage and sewerage to be submitted to be approved. So that's not considered to be an issue. For the vehicle access, you are correct that it doesn't include a pedestrian pavement. I suppose that was not considered necessary as part of the application. And there is, considering there is the access to the southern, with the removal of the northern access, as I explained earlier, that's not, the southern access is considered sufficient to cover that. So in the event that a pavement is added to the vehicle access, that would require an amendment to the application, and an assessment of that would have to be done by highways. For the pedestrian access, I don't have the details in front of me whether it's a dropped curb access, but I'm presuming it would be, considering it's a pedestrian access. And for the Downs link, I don't think we have those full details in front of us as to whether as an outline application they would come forward as part of the reserve matters. So we would secure that as a cycle path as well as a pedestrian path, yes, in the event that comes, in the event that this application is permitted.
Thank you for that. I mean, I make the point about the pedestrian access on the access road, because were one to live there and wish to go north for some of the attractions at Partridge Green, such as the Green Man, for example, it's a bit of a long walk round. I can see people going over the fence, basically.
Well, I did talk to the highways, because this issue came up earlier, I did talk to the highways officer, and he did say there is potential for a pavement to be added. It would have to be to the northern part of the vehicle access, because as I stated, there is potential impact on the tree to the south, which you wouldn't want a pavement there, because that would further impact on the root protection area. So there is scope there, but he has stated, in principle, acceptable, yeah, but it would be subject to further assessments and an amendment plan. So There is a possibility there of adding a pavement, but it would, as stated, it would require a further assessment and amendments to the application.
Okay, Councillor Crooker. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to return to the question of vehicle access from the B2315. Could we just see the photos again of the access points looking north and south on the B2315, please? So that's looking north, or that's looking north. Is that right? Yes. And it's got a continuous white line all the way along it. So there's obviously problems with cars overtaking there. Could I see the opposite direction, please? Okay, now I went to go and view the site this afternoon. I was there at about 4:15, perhaps a little bit later, and I drove past the site, and then I turned round, and I was coming from the southerly direction. I drove all the way past, turned round, and then came back down the road just to check the traffic, because the traffic was extremely heavy. I turned into Church Lane so that I could turn round again and come back up north towards Horsham. Church Lane is a little bit further south of the access point on the map. I had extreme problems being able to view, because we were close to the brow of the hill. I had extreme problems viewing the traffic coming over the brow of the hill. I have to say there was a car parked further along on the verge, but I just couldn't see the traffic was coming over. I had real problems getting out of there. Now this is within a few yards of the proposed access point further north, up the B2135. I can't see that some 200 residents, or 80 odd cars coming in and out, and perhaps with 2-car families, say 120 cars coming in and out every day, are going to be able to access and come out of that point safely, especially during the school rush time. So I have serious doubts about the access arrangements, and I wouldn't be happy to accept this proposal until we see more coming from West Sussex about traffic calming, traffic control, and better visibility displays.
Sorry, could we, you might agree with it, but could you keep the applause? Thank you. You want to come back? I'll come to you in a moment, just a moment.
I think I just want to remind members in terms of the history to this site here. Obviously, there was an application refused in 2022, which wasn't refused on highways grounds, and essentially the access is materially the same. I think our view is it is the best location for the access, and the technical details do demonstrate that it would provide a safe access. So I think we just need to be mindful of the material history for the site here, and the consultation responses we received from West Sussex County Council Highways. Thank you.
If I can just add a point as well. The access to the site is located on the brow of the hill, and your experience, Councillor, in coming out of Church Lane further to the south meant that you were looking up towards the crest of the hill with traffic coming over the other side. So it's not the same arrangement as being proposed here. So the drawings we have show that the location is on the peak, the crest of the hill, and that the visibility displays are achievable to the 85th percentile in accordance with national requirements for safe accesses. So the view of the experienced county officers who have reviewed all the information has been submitted both by the applicant and other parties, is that access can be safely provided in this location. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come to you, Councillor Knoll, yes.
Is there no way that any decision on this can be deferred until West Sussex look at it again? Or is it going to be a yes or no today?
West Sussex County Highways have visited the site, and we've gone back to them a number of times, particularly regarding the representations, etc., received. So, if members feel that's critical to your decision making, that's a decision you can make. But I think our officers' views is you have the information that you need, and obviously, we should be seeking to make a decision today, if at all possible. And only deferring it if it is really critical to do so, and you definitely don't have information that you need to be able to assess it. I think officers' view is it has been scrutinised and it is considered to be acceptable. I recognise there are local concerns, but obviously the evidence base we have says that it is an acceptable access. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. The previous application was basically refused just for water neutrality, and we are operating under the tilted balance, and we have an application here which makes a really substantial contribution to our housing supply. So in effect, the principle of the development is fairly established here. The water neutrality solution, as far as I can see, appears to be very sound, but I do really understand the very real concerns that people have about highway safety and access on this site. It's a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, but we're in a situation where the actual speeds are significantly in excess of that, and the way the road is operating is right at the boundaries of the sorts of speeds that Manual for Streets 2 was designed to cover, where their sort of typical their cut-off speeds that they talk about are 60 kilometres an hour and 40 miles an hour, which are slightly different, and many of these speeds are right on that boundary level. Manual for Streets 2 allows you to take into account the context of the site, so it doesn't it's not a hard and fast cut-off of what's acceptable or not. But I would argue that the suggestion that's been made that we should be applying design manual for roads and bridges geometries here is a case of being careful what you'd wish for, because the more you open up the geometries of things, the more you're encouraging vehicles to go faster. What really disappoints me is that West Sussex, on seeing these disappointingly high speeds for a 30-mile-an-hour limit in a village environment, instead of seeking to reduce those speeds, we're seeking to secure the maximum possible visibility displays. It seems to me that the obvious approach here, in terms of giving the best result for the residents and the best safety that's available, would be to sought to reduce the speeds. That's not something that we can guarantee to do at this point, because it's not within our control as a local planning authority to require that traffic calming takes place. Nonetheless, I think I would like to look at what things we might be able to do within the scope of what we've got before us. So one thing I'd like to say thank you to the officers for looking at the possibility of adding a piece of footway just to the north of the vehicle access, because as Councillor Croker says, and one of the speakers said, I think it's inevitable that pedestrians will choose to exit at that site. So a bit later on, I'd like to ask the officer how that would be best addressed, because I understand that West Sussex have said that they're open to that. So, for example, I'm wondering whether that is something that could be done by a delegation with a view to accept, subject to in order to be able to look at that, how that could be done. The second thing I'd like to discuss is that this is an outline application. At the moment, it's not safe to have the northern access, pedestrian access there. But it would be lovely to have a northern pedestrian access there. And as, again, Councillor Croker says, it is conceivable that some people will hop over the fence in their quest to get to the Green Man or wherever it is they're going. It would be a terrible shame if the reserved matters designed for this site blocked off the space that is currently sitting there in that indicative design and therefore prevented you ever having a northern access. Because maybe, and I really hope there is, one day we will have a speed reduction through moving of the speed limit, traffic calming and so on, that means that traffic is going along there at a more reasonable speed. And at that point, it might well be that the residents or somebody decides they want to have a northern access. So the second thing I want to explore is whether it would be possible to put in a condition on an approval that the reserved matters design allows that gap to be maintained such that should there ever be a realistic prospect of a northern access, there is enough space for that to occur. I was going to raise the point about the Downs link and access, which absolutely does need to be for cycles because it will obviously be used for cycles. I wasn't sure that I'd seen in the conditions and so on how that was definitely being secured to LTN 120 standards. So I just wanted to clarify with the officers that that is secure in the documentation as we have it. And the last thing I wanted to talk again was about the traffic calming issue. Obviously, we can't have a condition that requires there to be traffic calming, but I did just want to ask again about whether we could, through condition, through informative, through something, get the issue of traffic calming looked at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. In terms of the Northern Link and kind of future-proofing it, obviously this is a reserve matters where layout is for later consideration. So I think the best way to set forward your future expectations is by way of an informative in terms of how you would want a reserve matters to be, because we're not considering layout now. So I think some clear direction of what your expectations are at reserve matters stage would probably be most appropriate for that. In terms of the main vehicle access and the adding a pedestrian link to the north, you could do that through delegation if that's what members wish to look at. I think you have to be mindful that obviously we've had initial feedback from county that looks like it is hopefully technically feasible, but we don't have a definite on that. So I would suggest the wording is around exploring and seeking to achieve, if practical to do so, something along those lines, recognising that there may be a small possibility for whatever reason it's just a complete no. And I've forgotten, Councillor Fletcher, I know there was something else and I've forgotten what it was. Oh, the cycle access. Yeah. Oh, so the Downs link again, I would say I would suggest as an informative again, because it's the layout of the site, and I think Dr. Lyons did raise a point in saying it's cycle and pedestrian, but obviously we don't have that detail now. And in terms of traffic calming, I think I expressed earlier on that I think it's our view it's not necessary to make the development acceptable, but I recognise the concerns in your comments, Councillor Fletcher. I think within the scope of this application, I think my suggestion would be to encourage exploring that with county by way of an informative, because I think it's difficult for us to justify that. We don't have any detail. Even if we were to consider it necessary, we couldn't just add a condition on. It would have to be by way of discussion with county and a legal agreement. And obviously our view is it's just not necessary for this development, but recognise there could be benefits that the developer may wish to explore separately with county highways. I hope that answers all your questions, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, that's really helpful, and I think personally I'd feel inclined to take you up on all four of those suggestions. The informatives wouldn't need an alternative motion, but the delegation to explore and seek to achieve a pedestrian footpath would. So I'll wait until the debate has concluded and see if it's then an appropriate time to bring an alternative motion on that.
I'll come to you in a moment, Councillor Vanderbilt. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I went through, I did ask a question about the transport plan and got an answer, but obviously you get an answer to a question, it depends how you ask the question. I found that the transport plan section was quite misleading because actually, from what I've heard, the bus doesn't actually provide a really good way of getting into Horsham, which is quite disappointing. Giving a bus voucher for a non-existent bus, I did find it quite interesting. I went through, as you would imagine, basically paragraph 6.51 through to 6.55, and I found that 6.54 and 6.53 sort of contradict each other, but clearly what's needed is at least an offset of 227 properties plus, and the agents have also agreed that additional properties may be required by Saxon Wheel to offset this development if the water isn't offset properly. But if I look at the condition, condition 9, I read it and it didn't strike me that it didn't strike me that it actually met those conditions of ensuring that it was 227 plus. But on the other hand, if it's been written by a legal hand, somebody might tell me that it does ensure that. So I'd like to know, as it is worded there, does it guarantee the 227 plus to meet the water neutrality requirement? It's my first question. And I would also say that I would certainly support a condition or an amendment looking to put a pavement on the north side of the drive out of this development. I think it makes absolute sense because it doesn't affect the root ball of the oak tree, which is at the south. Thank you.
So in response to your question there, Councillor, condition 9 looks purely at the new homes and the water efficiencies that will go within them to achieve just shy of 85 litre per person per day fixtures and fittings. The legal agreement, which will accompany a planning permission, would secure the offsetting on the Saxon Wheel properties, which would be the 227 potentially more homes. Hopefully that answers your question.
If I may, Chairman, so basically you're saying it's a separate document?
Correct, there's two parts to it, yes.
Councillor Vanderbilt.
Thank you, Chairman. Just looking at the map here, there are quite a number of access points along that road on both sides. Plus, there appear to be access points to individual homes that don't come off roads. And I'm curious as to why this access is going to be any more perilous than any of the ones that are already in existence.
Thank you. Councillor Perry.
It's a point on the buses really, because as a user of the number 17 bus, I just think West Sussex should be accepting. This has only happened, this change to the Partridge Green bus on the 1st of September. It's now the 17th of September. And I'm wondering if there's anything we can do to put a little bit more pressure on for the Partridge Green service to be improved. If there's going to potentially be over 200 people more in the area, they definitely need a better service to Horsham. I've seen people having to get off the bus and walk a very long way into Partridge Green only today, and other people left quite stranded because they haven't been able to have the access they used to have only a few weeks ago. So this bus service is a really important situation, and one I hope that can be considered somehow.
Thank you.
I think if there's anything that Horsham District Council wishes to do, it would sit outside the framework of this planning committee. I think obviously, that there are other matters which consider a site sustainable, not just its links by bus. But obviously that's something that I can discuss perhaps with Cabinet Member outside of the planning committee forum. Obviously in terms of this site, notwithstanding the recent changes, it's still considered to be a sustainable site close to some level of services, and obviously that's supported by the background documents for the new local plan review. Thank you.
Any other comments? No. Okay. Councillor Fletcher, you had a number of proposals, informatives, etc.
Yes, and I'm hoping the officers might assist me on this. So I'm suggesting that we do put in the informatives about future-proofing the Northern Link, about ensuring that the Downs Link access across the site and onto the Downs Link meets LTN 120 and is suitable for both pedestrians and cyclists, and that we encourage exploration with county on traffic calming, something which hopefully the parish council will be happy to engage in as well. So that leaves an alternative motion regarding a delegation of with a view to approval in consultation with the head of planning, the local members and the cabinet member, and I'm open for alternative suggestions on that, to explore and seek to achieve a pedestrian footway on the northern side of the vehicle access to the site.
Thank you. I just want to ask for clarity on a couple of points.
Happy to take advice if it can be improved.
Just sure that we've captured it.
I thought it was very clear, Councillor Fletcher. I don't think there's anything I would suggest. I think it's very clear what the alternative motion is. I'll read what I've put. Alternative motion is to delegate with a view to approve, in consultation with local members and the cabinet member for planning, to explore and seek to achieve a pedestrian footway on the northern part of the site access. Vehicular access. Well. Access. And then obviously the informatives regarding safeguarding northern pedestrian link, ensuring the Downs Link access meets LTN 120 and suitable for pedestrian and cyclists, and I think it's for the developer to explore traffic calming with West Sussex County Council Highways. I think that was clear.
Yes, I mean, I think as HDC we would be happy to support that, yes? I don't know if that needs to be added in there.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Croker? Or do you second it, or are you asking for your time? Second the motion. Okay, thank you. Okay. All those in favour of that? Right.
That's 11 for.
Those against?
And 2 against.
Any abstentions?
No abstentions.
Therefore, the motion is carried. Thank you.
It's up to you.
Before we move on, just a 5-minute break. Everyone happy to have a 5-minute break? Or do you want to carry on? No? Okay, 5-minute break. Be back here at Could you retake your seats, please? Okay, moving on to agenda item number 7, which is land parcel north of Downsview Avenue, Storrington. Could I ask the officers to make a presentation regarding this application, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, good evening. This item concerns application DC 230290, which is an application at land north of Downsview Avenue in Storrington. Before I begin the main presentation, members should note of the receipt of an additional letter of public representation subsequent to publication of the officer's report. That representation addresses concerns regarding the impacts of proposed access works at the entrance to the site off Downsview Avenue upon Tree 32 within neighbouring land to the southwest of the appeals site. This is considered to be addressed by paragraph 6.26 of the published committee report, which addresses the same concern and the effects of the development. Specifically, that paragraph advises that the reserved matters before this committee, those being matters of appearance, scale, landscaping and appearance, would not negatively impact upon the health of the tree, noting the access works were subject of a previously approved grant of outline planning permission. Turning to the main presentation, as stated, this application concerns land north of Downsview Avenue, as indicated on red on the slide before you at the moment. The site comprises a single field in agricultural use, together with boundary vegetation to the west and east. A public right-of-way, number 2448, runs along the western extent of the site boundary and connects to Water Lane to the north of the site and beyond the defined site area. The site is situated on a slight gradient, with land falling away from the site to the north. The site is allocated within the Storrington and Sullington neighbourhood plan for the development of at least 60 dwellings. Outline planning permission was granted pursuant to application reference DC 19/2015 for the development of up to 62 dwellings, together with matters of access to the north of Downsview Avenue. For interest, the approved point of access runs to the direct north of the existing route of Downsview Avenue. This application seeks reserved matters approval following the grant of outline planning permission for matters of layout, landscaping, appearance and scale. The layout of the proposed development is shown on the slide before you. The development is laid out in a manner which would extend Downsview Avenue to the north, continue Downsview Avenue to the north of its existing location before turning to the east at the northern extent of the site. A secondary access road, single looped access road, is incorporated within the development site, on which the majority of proposed dwellings are situated. The existing public right-of-way would be retained at the western extent of the site, separated from the main access by hedge and tree planting. Access to the public right-of-way from Downsview Avenue would be afforded by way of raised table at the southern extent of the site. All proposed dwellings are arranged to face outwards, with the proposed development considered to display strong building lines containing the majority of private garden spaces within those building lines, particularly within the central and northern sections of the site. An area of public open space, a suds basin, and an area dedicated for ecological enhancement will all be featured within the northern extent of the site, with ecological enhancement in particular focused on the northeastern extent of the site. Turning to the parameter plan, this is one of the parameter plans which is approved as part of the outline consent. That requires that two-storey housing be situated within the light pink, unfortunately the colours aren't great, the light pink area to the left-hand side and the bottom half of the development site, with 2.5-storey housing concentrated within the area shown in yellow. That accords with what the proposal is currently providing, with 2.5-storey housing concentrated within the central part of the site and off to its east-hand side, and with 2-storey housing concentrated on its respective boundaries to the north, west and south. Turning to matters of design, designs throughout the development are generally considered to be strong. Proposed dwellings incorporate a range of traditionally pitched roof surfaces, a mix of gabled, half-hipped and hipped roof forms. Where gabled forms are incorporated, these read as strong features and are often combined with the use of vertical tile hanging to provide additional visual interest. On screen at present is one of the street elevations submitted in support of the proposal. This shows the west-hand side access together with the southernmost access where it loops around to the central part of the site. This plan isn't as detailed as some of the individual plot elevations, but is indicated in essence to provide an understanding of the way in which the development relates to itself. This is the other street scene elevation, which shows the central part of the site and the northernmost part of the site on the southernmost, the bottommost visual here. The range of materials used throughout the development is considered acceptable, with the majority of proposed dwellings constructed of facing brick or incorporating vertical tile hanging as a detailing component. A small number of dwellings are constructed of flint stonework, with the use of render, albeit present, limited to 4 buildings at ground floor only. Appropriate attention in particular is considered to have been given to plots which occupy positions where development turns the corner, in particular plots 4, 15, 32, 53 and 56, with the secondary elevation of those dwellings being well designed and detailed. The use of decorative components, including decorative brickwork and tile courses and quoins, together with exposed rafter ends, is exhibited throughout the development and on a number of individual house type designs. These are obviously not the full range of proposed house designs, but these are a feature set intended to give a bit of an idea of the designs that we're seeing on this site and to demonstrate some of those detailing components in addition. Turning to parking, the Local Highways Authority's guidance on parking standards sets an expectation for 136 total spaces within the development site. That comprises 124 resident spaces and 12 visitor parking spaces. The proposed development in totality provides 131 resident spaces and 10 visitor parking spaces, constituting 140 spaces overall. It should, though, be, apologies, I'm showing the wrong plan. It should, though, be noted that that provision is contingent upon parking within garage spaces. As shown on the plan, the number of the garages are illustrated in purple. When you apply LHA guidance, it models that garaging should be counted as 0.5 spaces. That reflects the tendency of people to use garaging for storage purposes or for other purposes. After such a deduction is applied, total parking provision is reduced to 130.5 spaces. There is therefore a slight under-provision of 3.5 resident spaces and 2 visitor spaces. That is not considered significant and in the view of officers would not justify a refusal of planning permission. There would appear to be informal capacity for on-street parking within the development site and within neighbouring streets if needed, noting that the proposed streets within the development site are a minimum of 4.8 metres in width, such that parking could occur without impeding the ability of vehicles to pass. Turning to trees, the development does benefit from a well-established tree line on its east-hand side, which is shown on the slide before you. The submitted arboricultural impact assessment identifies minor encroachment arising from the construction of visitor parking spaces into the root protection areas of trees T12 and T10 associated with at the eastern extent of the site. While the Council's arboricultural officer has raised concern in this specific respect, the degree of encroachment is less than 5%, with relevant works to be undertaken within with arboricultural supervision and subject to a no-dig cellular confinement system, details of which are contained within the submitted arboricultural impact assessment. It is not considered that the proposed development would compromise the successful retention of existing trees in this location of the application site. In respect of proposed housing mix, we understand, of course, the proposal provides 62 total units in line with the outline planning permission. That comprises 40 market units and 22 affordable housing units, which is equivalent to 35% of total provision and is compliant with current expectations and requirements of HDPF Policy 16. The proposed mix of unit sizes, in addition, is in accordance with the recommendations of the Strategic Housing Market Assessment, with detailed explanation contained within the Officer Report in that respect. 84% of total units fall within the 1, 2 and 3 bed categories, which is also considered to align with an expectation contained within the adopted neighbourhood plan. This application would provide for a substantial number of 1, 2 and 3 bed units. And finally, just some images to show the context of the application site. So this is a view from Downsview Avenue to the north of the site. So obviously members will note it is of suburban nature. We have detached houses with no boundary treatments or a general absence of boundary treatments, certainly on the frontage of the site, with the street on the driveway parking evident within the street scene. On the subindex, this is looking towards the subindex end of the site, so you can see the closest neighbouring dwelling off to the right-hand side. There is a strip of land on the southern part of the site, which is shown on the right here, which comprises a relatively well-established hedgerow. That falls outside of the application site, so is to be retained as a consequence of the development proposals. In effect, the proposal doesn't rely on that land, it's outside the red line, so that provides the benefit of providing added separation to dwellings to the south, albeit it is considered that appropriate separations are provided with no unacceptable effects upon the amenity of neighbouring users or land, of occupiers of land considered. This is looking towards the central and eastern part of the site, so you can see the established tree line on the east-hand side, with the water lane industrial estate behind. In respect of water neutrality, the scheme is relying on an abstraction borehole elsewhere in the district to be details of which are to be secured through the completion of a Section 106 agreement. That scheme has been subject to appropriate assessment. Natural England have confirmed their agreement with the conclusions of the authority's assessment as to the absence of effects upon the Arun Valley sites. In respect of flood risk, the scheme is supported by a detailed drainage strategy, which also contains detailed calculations as the expected collection of rainwater and surface water throughout the development. That has been considered in detail by the lead local flood authority, who have confirmed no objection to the proposals. Overall, the proposal accords with relevant parameters agreed at outline stage and which establish the acceptability of the principal development in addition to its access arrangements. It is considered the detailed proposals are of a nature which comply with the requirements of the policy allocation, together with relevant development plan policy. As such, it is recommended the planning permission be granted, subject to the conditions outlined within the Officer's Report and the completion of a Section 106 agreement to secure the relevant off-site water neutrality mitigations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I invite Guy Thorne, please, to speak for 2 minutes? Thank you. Excuse me, sorry, could you turn your mic on, please? That's it, thank you.
Is that on? My name's Guy Thorne. I'm resident of number 32 Downsview, where the access is at the top of my drive. I've submitted a number of strong objections ranging from environmental, privacy and safety, overdevelopment and risk of flooding. On 2 occasions I've submitted photographic evidence of severe flooding to the southeast of the field, where storks and pond life have now taken residence. I note that water neutrality is a key item, and I note from the report that was submitted that there was a very clear lack of clarity around what boreholes were sampled during the report. I think the report that was submitted, there were actually certain pages that were illegible and not able to be read. And there was also some conclusions that the investigation and the groundwater monitoring didn't actually comply with British standards. It's clear from that, I would suggest, that a new report is actually needed before any approval can even be considered, let alone granted. And the final point is in relation to privacy and safety. A worrying part of the proposal actually has 3 dwellings, plots 1, 2 and 3, with 6 parking spaces directly to the side of the entrance as you enter the field. Those directly adjoin my own driveway. In addition, I feel there's been extremely poor judgment on numerous levels in this regard, and the most recent plan is actually far worse than the original one that was submitted, which actually had properties that were in keeping with the local road of Downsview, which primarily is 3 and 4 bed properties. I would further add finally that the dwellings as proposed are not in keeping with the location, and the applicant should think more carefully about the aesthetics, look and feel of entering the new development, and the 6 parking spaces and the 3 small properties are certainly not in keeping with that. The last point I would make is that the existing properties at number 32 and 33 currently do reverse out of their driveways blindly, given that there's no traffic coming from the field. These properties would now be moving out onto moving traffic, so I'm keen to understand how the developers would maximise visibility, reduce danger to local residents coming from the over-excessive overdevelopment that's proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Philip Jones, you have 2 minutes, please. Councillor Knoll.
Sorry, just a point of, well, just a point to, I want to clarify. I think the witness said storks are nesting there. Was that correct, or did I mishear that?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay, my name is Phil Jones. I've got 4 main reasons for objecting to this proposal. Firstly, off-site drainage. After the previous outline approval, the HDC drainage officer advised me by email that the off-site impact of the development would need to be assessed before getting to this stage. CrowdAce still has not done so. There are significant issues with the drainage design. It does not prevent runoff from the site down footpath 2448 to the north during periods of heavy rain. I provided extensive photographic evidence of that. This has a considerable impact on the use of the footpath and the hamlet of East Wanley. Their drainage modelling highlights considerable uncertainties. However, they put in no contingency for larger attenuation ponds or for failure of the borehole extraction scheme. The site's geology also means that borehole extraction may increase the flooding problems experienced in East Wanley. Now to wider landscape impact. Elevation profiles, such as this one, show that the development will likely urbanise the view of the South Downs National Park from footpath 2463, 1 kilometre to the north. I note the planning officer had no views from that direction. It also impacts on the dark skies experienced within the green gap established in the parish neighbourhood plan. This contravenes the requirements of both the current and proposed local plans. The site design provides limited mitigation of the site's impact on the wider landscape, particularly on that northern side. For these related reasons, HDC now require a wider landscape impact assessment for the nearby Stowe 1 site in the Regulation 19 local plan. I suggest that you should request the same pre-development condition for this site. Thirdly, to be water neutral, the developer should be required to offset actual water consumption, not wishful forecasts. Finally, no meaningful mitigation has been put in place to protect the endangered hazel dormice population in the adjacent woodland. They don't have a voice, you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, Bill Norris, please.
Good evening. Yes, my name's Bill Norris. My objection concerns the positioning of plot 1 at the entrance to the site, which is hard up against the existing large 4-bedroom dwelling at 32 Downsview Avenue. Section 6, paragraph 17 of your report states that the site frontage against an extended Downsview Avenue would see dwellings positioned so as to continue the existing build line. And it goes on to say that plots 1 to 4 are staggered so as to provide gradual transition with no significant build forward of the existing adjacent properties. But this is clearly not the case, as anyone standing along Downsview Avenue can see that plot 1 would stick out like a sore thumb and totally destroy the building line. Respondents have pointed out many times over the multiple planning applications that the earlier plan, site plan, DC 190215, dated the 3rd of October 2019, should be reinstated, since whilst not being fully in line with the existing build line, it would be less in your face, as plot 1 would be further away from the existing build and consequently less noticeable. It would also be shielded by the existing trees and shrubbery adjacent to the curbside at 32 Downsview Avenue. I wonder whether members are even aware of this earlier plan and would ask you to look at it, since all residents regard it as superior and less obtrusive than the current plan, as plot 1 is not stuck right next to 32 Downsview Avenue, completely destroying the build line. And I have copies if anybody would like to look at them. But I would like to know, I would ask why this plan was ever changed. Furthermore, section 6 also states that development will require to reflect the scale of surrounding buildings, and this will clearly not be the case with the small plots 1 and 2 directly abutting the existing large 4-bedroom detached houses. By moving plot 1 away from the much larger 32 Downsview Avenue, this clash of styles will be minimised while not overshadowing the existing house. In conclusion, I would ask that if they have not already done so, members physically visit the site before making a decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Zoe Wainwright, please.
Good evening, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Zoe Wainwright, and I'm an architectural designer for Crowdace Homes, who are the applicant of this reserve matters. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this application, which is for the approval of the details of appearance, layout, landscaping and scale for 62 new dwellings at Downsview Avenue, Storrington. Crowdace Homes are a well-established family-run home builder who pride ourselves on high-quality architectural design and are proud to present the scheme in front of you this evening. This site provides much-needed new homes within the area, enhancements to the existing right-of-way, and includes over 35% affordable housing. This scheme has been worked on through positive collaboration with Horsham District Council to ensure that the proposed development meets the high standards of the local area. This process ensures that the scheme will integrate well into its locality and provide an exemplary new neighbourhood in the town of Storrington. This has resulted in the positive recommendation in front of you this evening. The proposed layout takes advantage of the site setting, in particular the well-established vegetation, which frames the new development and provides enhancement to the well-considered landscaping proposals that accompany the application. As part of the design process, a thorough architectural appraisal of the surrounding area has been undertaken, ensuring that proposed dwellings complement the local vernacular. The external appearance of the housing positively responds to its surroundings, picking out key features found in the village, such as Flemish bond brickwork, bullnose vertical tile hanging, and random knapped flint. The scheme proposes water neutrality in line with Natural England guidance through comprehensive water offsetting strategies. This has been discussed and considered in detail with the local authority and Natural England, with support now given for a scheme that will not impact on the Arun Valley sites. In conclusion, the application before members proposes a high-quality design solution for the site, situated in a sustainable location with the benefit of an outline planning permission. The scheme will provide 62 dwellings that have been on hold since September 2021 and are much needed within the district. The applicant therefore respectfully requests that members accept the officer recommendation and resolve to grant reserve matters approval for this new development. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a number of matters I'd like to discuss after hearing the views of the public. In terms of the building line, I'll address these points in turn, I should say. In terms of the building line, it is true that indeed the positioning of plot 1 is slightly further forward than the position of plot 32 to the south, number 32 to the south. Though that isn't a significant step forward. It's a step forward of a number of metres. The detailed design of plots 1 to 4 is good. It provides a continued frontage onto Downsview Avenue, which is considered to provide visual interest and to ultimately respect the prevailing character of the local area. A number of comments were made in respect of a previous layout or iteration of the proposals. That isn't before you now for consideration, so we can only consider now what is currently before us. But if it does assist, the reason why that plan was not considered acceptable in the past is it would have positioned the rear elevation of plots at the frontage of the site to the continued Downsview Avenue, would have provided an extensive length of suburban boundary fencing along the entrance of the site, which is considered to be inferior to what we have before us, which features trees, it features appropriate planting, it features visually attractive dwellings that continue the building line forward. Yes, there is a slight step forward, but ultimately that isn't significant in general terms. A concern was raised in terms of overdevelopment. Again, the quantum of development is set by the grant of outline consent. That reflects what we have before us at the moment, a proposal for 62 dwellings. In terms of the ecological condition of the site, that has been formally assessed by way of professionally conducted ecological assessments. Those do include relevant protected species where concerns have been raised, and relevant ecologists have visited the site and made a number of recommendations in that respect. Those are captured within the scope of mitigation set forward in support of the proposal and will be secured by the range of recommended conditions. In respect of lighting, condition number 7 attached to the officer report would require the submission of external lighting as part of the landscaping proposal. So we don't yet have details before us at the moment, but of course the ability to secure a sensitive lighting design scheme, one which respects the dark skies qualities of this area of the site whilst being proportionate to safety needs, does indeed exist. In terms of drainage, I can only reiterate that the proposal is supported by a very detailed drainage strategy. That strategy includes a wide range of detailed drainage calculations, including future rainfall modelling for future climate change events. There is a detailed report which advances the justification for the proposed means of surface water drainage and by way of deep surface borehole, soakaway borehole. Those measures have been considered by the lead local flood authority and are considered acceptable. In terms of the parking arrangements forward of plots 1 to 3, I would advise that those are generally consistent with prevailing street scene to the south of the site, where on-street parking or driveway parking is relatively prominent. They are screened in part by a hedge which surrounds those spaces and are sufficiently set out to allow vehicles to manoeuvre within that driveway space and exit onto the highway in a forward gear. In terms of the concerns regarding the water neutrality strategy, those really relate to some of the comments made by Environmental Health and which addressed in our report. In effect, the details of sampling that are currently conducted at the South Lodge Hotel, which is the offsetting site, those are legible. I have read them myself. And of course, the recommendation is to require a regime of further sampling, the details of appropriate treatment, etc., that will be secured through a legal agreement. So it is understood there's definitely a need for further information in those regards, but that would always inevitably be the case for a proposal relying on a borehole at this stage of approval. So subject to that legal provision, we can be confident that the proposal would satisfy any water neutrality related obligations, the requirements of the habitat regulations, hence why a recommendation for approval has been made, and that conclusion is ultimately supported by Natural England as the nature conservation body. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Invite the local ward member, Councillor Grech. Do you have anything to say on this matter?
Thank you, Chair. My other fellow ward members aren't here, but I think I'm speaking for them as well. Just a couple of issues that I would like to raise. I'm aware that the residents on Downsview Avenue and Melton Drive. Yeah, I get confused sometimes when I live down there. Are concerned about overspill parking. I hear what the officers say about there is quite a lot of parking available on the site, and there is scope for on-street parking on the site, but should there be any overspill, knowing the area, I know there isn't a lot of on-street parking already because, as has previously been said, most residents park in their own drives. But I think the concern of the residents I've talked to, is that there could be inconsiderate parking, such as parking too close to junctions and possibly parking too close to drives. I guess that's a behavioural issue. There's not much we can do about that, except see how it goes. My primary concern is the public footpath that runs from Downsview Avenue northwards. At the moment, coming off that public footpath, you come straight onto Downsview Avenue. You don't have any vehicles coming from behind you, so it's very safe. It's not terribly busy up there anyway from a vehicle point of view. So you have a dog that's loose that runs out into the road, or a child, you're probably okay, while you catch that dog or child. But looking at that, with the hedgerow and the trees, as you're walking south, you won't actually see anything coming from behind you on the new development, and that concerns me. A dog could run out, a child could run out, or even if you're walking, you generally aren't paying attention to your surroundings as much as you could be. I know there's an accessibility issue, but I would like to see a gate there just to make a stop, so people actually can, catch their dogs, catch their children, and actually have time to maybe turn around and have a look and see what's coming behind them. That's all I've got to say, really.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, thanks very much for those comments. Firstly, you address parking. It's expressed within a number of representations. I'm very much aware of the public concerns in those respects. I think we need to be aware of in effect, the limited degree of overspill parking. So that's under provision, really, that we're anticipating in this instance. In totality, that's about 5 vehicles on the basis of what we're looking at the moment. So it is a very minor degree of under provision. I think it's highly likely that that would be contained within the extent of the site itself. But of course, it is possible that some degree of overspill parking could occur beyond the site. And I think what I would advise is, well, I suppose my question would be, is what would be the harm associated with that arrangement? On-street parking on Downsview Avenue is already present. It is already characteristic of the street scene in terms of its visual appearance. In terms of capacity, we don't have details of on-street parking capacity at present, but we would have to be confident that any resultant overspill amounted to a severe impact on highways operation, which is a very high threshold. So I think the view of officers in that respect is, notwithstanding that there is a concern, and notwithstanding that there is a slight under provision relative to standards, overall the development is considered acceptable. And I think I would point out, in addition, that part of the reason that under provision exists is because of the way in which garage spaces are counted. Now, we know that we've applied a 0.5 reduction for those garage spaces, but they are sized in accordance with the Manual of the Street Standards, so they could be used by occupiers if the need arose. And of course, if there was a significant concern in terms of the amount of vehicles on the site, parking capacity, individual occupiers may well determine to use those garage spaces for the purposes which they could be utilised for. So I think that's what I'd say in response. Turning to the public footpath, I think for the context, I believe the concern relates to where this footpath crosses the main access at the south of the site. So at present, the footway in effect continues beyond the Downsview cul-de-sac, and there's no vehicular access, of course, which continues alongside the access or the private right of the at the moment. So the proposal would see the right of way initially continued on a typical pavement, then cross the main access by way of a raised table, and then continue northwards, separated from the rest of the site by a hedge and tree row planting. I think though it's important to understand what the trees and hedges are. So the landscape and maintenance and management plan prescribes that the hedge will be maintained to a height of 0.8 metres. So at that height, you should have generally quite good visibility looking behind you or looking to the left-hand side if you are travelling southwards on the right of way. It's for vehicles which are approaching from that direction. In addition, the fact that the raised table is perpendicular, so you turn through 90 degrees to get on across the road, is advantageous because, of course, that incentivises people to stop. It incentivises people to look in both directions. And the manual for street standards for a pedestrian visibility display are quite limited at 2.2 metres, sorry, 2 by 2 metres, which is provided in this instance. Though no objections been received from the Public Rights of Way team in that respect. They've commented on the proposals, they're aware of what the intention is here, or from the Highways Authority in that respect. So I think if there were concern in terms of highway safety, I would have expected one of those consultees to bring that up as a material comment, but I do understand the concern, although for the reasons set out in the report, I don't expect that arrangement to result in an unacceptable effect upon the safety of users. Thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor Circus, yes.
Firstly, thank you, Chairman. I asked a question, I can't remember the answer I got, so I'm wondering whether I could ask the question again, whether Giles can tell me what the answer to this is. Downsview is a hill, so to speak. You drive up, and one is going up until one gets basically to the point where this development is proposed. Can you tell me what happens to the topography at that point? Does it continue to go up? I can't recall. Or does it flatten out? Does it come down?
I certainly can clarify this. So you are right. As you drive up Downsview Avenue, there's a general increase in elevation as you move northwards. When you get to the application site, the site may not quite sit on the peak, but it certainly sits very close to it if it isn't the case. But at the southernmost extent of the site, as shown on the street scene elevations, particularly on the top, it's generally level, and then it slowly starts to fall away to the north. So there is a fall of a few metres throughout the application site from its southernmost extent to its northernmost extent. That becomes much more pronounced beyond the northern extent of the site, where land steeps away more steeply towards a stream at the bottom of a valley as such. So that's the arrangement at present.
Thank you, Giles. My particular concern was that topography can be actually a most important factor in the acceptability of a planning application. And there's one development, I think they're apartments, aren't they? 3 stories, which it seems to me could be in danger of being very overpowering, both within the development and as far as the neighbours at the top of Downsview Avenue are concerned. If I can just carry on, it seems to me, if you look at the numbers, 62, isn't it? You're talking about a density. It's going to be a very dense development compared with even the development to the south, which is of course older. I have to say I share the concerns about parking, and the reason is partly that the speed limit along Melton Drive is the road that comes off Fryan Road and then joins Downsview Avenue. by a mistake that the county council made years ago, they designated the speed limit down that road as national speed limit, which means 60 miles an hour, which of course is totally unsuitable for a residential road. But when I asked them about it, they said, oh dear, we messed up on that one, but it hardly makes sense for us to do anything about it at this stage. Well, that adds to my concern about whether there will be any parking, overflow parking, in Melton Drive. And so, given that this is a dense development, that does concern me. Can I just one other thing, if I may, is that I believe there is an element of woodland on the left as you come up Downsview and you're looking into this proposed development. On the left-hand side, there's an area of woodland where I think application has been made to declare it ancient woodland. And I know this is not a matter directly for this committee, but I do think if we have areas of ancient woodland, we should do all we can to protect those areas. They are declining and have declined quite considerably over the years. So I don't know whether the officers have anything to say about that, but I certainly wouldn't want this development to have any negative effect on any area of ancient woodland or potential ancient woodland. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Serkis. I think it's obviously important for members to recognise this as a reserve matters, and the quantum of development was established as part of the outline scheme, and obviously this delivers that quantum of development. So delivering that number of units has already been established, and obviously when you're developing greenfield sites, you want to make the best and most efficient use of land, which is what this seeks to do. And so, you know, we have to consider a number of factors: the design of the dwellings, the plot sizes, garden sizes, the level of landscaping, the level of parking, and you have to balance those factors in coming up with a good design. And officers feel that achieves that. And whilst there is a minor shortfall in terms of parking against county standards, my colleagues talked about, the size of the streets, the potential use of garages, etc. And so, you know, when you consider all of those matters in the round, officers can consider this to be acceptable. In terms of any future designation to the west of the site, obviously that's not before us today. It's not designated as ancient woodland, but obviously even if there were a designation, this site has been granted outline consent already, and that's a material planning consideration. But we can't consider something that may or may not happen in the future. We have to consider based on the facts before us now. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you. Two questions for officers. The first one is I didn't catch the width of the internal roads, so could you clarify that point for me first, please?
Yeah, certainly. It's 4.8 metres minimum, so that's the internal looped road in the central part of the site. The west-hand side access, so the continued down to Avenue is wider. I don't have the exact width before me.
So that's the pink road.
Yes, correct.
Okay, because I was concerned that my car's 2.22 metres wide, a white van is 2.5 metres wide, and a Kia Sportage is 1.87 metres wide, and I'm quite concerned we don't want a Broadridge Heath type situation where you can't actually navigate the streets because of on-street parking, so I was quite concerned about that. The second question is, under the item to do with the previous application, which was essentially to do with I think it was the outline we were talking about. It is referred to ecological considerations in 6.52. It refers to an earlier report. if I look at the earlier report, essentially on that one, it talks about dormice, it talks about the understory and the looking after the trees and all that sort of thing in the report. But I am quite concerned in this, effectively, there's lots of questions raised by the the tree man. Get it that way. And there are lots of questions that are outstanding. And one of the things that was proposed in 21/0749 was a landscape strip to be created as per that recommendation, as per those documents. Is that meant to be represented by those little green bubbles there?
Okay, so to clarify, those green bubbles are trees to be planted at the southern extent of the site. So it is discussed within the officer report, but the same landscape buffer which was shown on the original outline consent isn't featured. There are reasons for that in terms of some of the ecological assessments and identification of additional constraints, in particular badger sets and associated buffer boundaries from those. So the way in which the development has had to accommodate those has resulted in a general shift to development, which unfortunately means that those can't be accommodated. It's difficult to discuss because of our duties under the Protection of Badgers Act. But that's the sort of general reason as to why that's not there. It's regrettable, but ultimately in the context of the informal boundary which exists outside the site is likely not necessary to establish the acceptability of the proposal in landscape terms. In terms of ecology, we do have a full range of species surveys that have been conducted in accordance with the relevant CEM standards, with relevant updated surveys conducted in support of this proposal specifically. So we're not relying solely on assessments which were conducted at outline stage. Relevant recommendations are captured within the various conditions attached to the proposals. In terms of the ARB comments, I've addressed those within my report, I've addressed them within my presentation. There is a slight encroachment into the RPA of 2 trees of less than 5% at the eastern side boundary. Yes, it's regrettable, but I think subject to the mitigation measures set out within the arboricultural impact assessment, it likely isn't the case that we're going to have result in the loss of those trees and associated suitability or habitat suitability for dormouse.
Just to add, Councillor Clark, I raised that very point when I initially read the report, and having discussed that and the particular other ecological reasons as to why that's not possible, I'm satisfied that the proposal before us is acceptable, and whilst that's regrettable it's not provided, there are particular other ecological reasons as to why it wasn't possible to provide that. Thank you.
Yes, but is it just not the case that if it was a less dense development, then you could accommodate it? I mean, just because the outline was for 62 houses, if you built less houses, that you could accommodate the nature side of things. Is that not the fact?
Yeah, I note that concern, though. I think, though, we do have to acknowledge that the adopted neighbourhood plan allocates the site for at least 60 dwellings. So whatever we're considering on this site has to provide 60 dwellings as a minimum in order to achieve the recommendations of the neighbourhood plan. So I think I look at that. I think of the context of the site. A reduction of 2 houses, it is likely not going to result in a significant change overall. But even if that were the case, of course, then we'd have to consider any implications on, in terms of the loss of housing and the associated benefit which that provides, what might be a resultant impact upon the provision of affordable housing, etc. So it isn't necessarily a simple case that reducing the site to 60 dwellings would necessarily resolve all concerns.
No, I know that we don't like to go against neighbourhood plans, but it doesn't stop us occasionally doing it when it suits us. And what I'm saying basically is if it was less than 60 houses, it wouldn't be the end of the world if that's what we wanted to do. But I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much. It's as we've said, we've established the principle with the previous permission on this. I was looking at the footpath that goes alongside the site. I'd originally looked at it and assumed that the footpath, public right-of-way footpath, was acting as a footway for the site access road. It isn't, because it's separated by a hedge. It's also not going to be very effective at it anyway, because it doesn't have a sealed surface, so it wouldn't be a suitable path for people to walk on in wet weather and with their pushchairs and so on. I'm really disappointed that West Sussex have declared they're happy with this arrangement, because when you look at the access road, which, as you say, is wider than the 4.8 metres, it's a long straight road. It encourages people to drive along there fast, and we're requiring people to walk in the road. They haven't objected. I really wish they'd looked for a better solution that actually encouraged active travel, and in this case not necessarily even active travel, just active being outdoors whilst being a young person who's not yet really competent to deal with busy traffic on your own. I'm struggling to see what we can do about it at this stage. I'm deeply disappointed. I hope we won't be doing this again. I did wonder, although it would only very slightly improve the situation, whether there might be a case to actually knock a hole in the hedge opposite the middle pink, the northernmost pink bit of the road loop, because if you were walking in or out of the site and you just happened to fancy not walking on the tarmac in front of the cars, you might want to walk on the footpath if the weather was good, and if you're coming from the middle of the site you can't, because you've got a 0.8 metre hedge in your way.
Thank you.
Hi. Yes, I understand those concerns. I mean, it does follow, of course, because of the way in which the right-of-way is separated from the site, that it limits its usability for occupiers of the site itself. That's partly in reflection of what the neighbourhood plan allocation expects in terms of the treatment of the right-of-way at that part of the site, and the way in which ecological features should be enhanced and preserved as well. In addition, I did have another point, I've slipped my mind, I apologise, but I mean, certainly in terms of driving a link just to the north of, I believe it's plot 32 on the plan before me, or it's not the closest resolution. So, I mean, that could be possibly achieved by way of appropriately worded condition, amendment to the soft landscaping strategy, etc. I mean, of course, it would be for members to determine that were necessary to make the development acceptable, that there were appropriate justification for that, but it could be done.
If other members were happy to support that, I'd be interested in doing that. I think it would be of benefit to people who wanted to access that right of way. It's also not always a good thing on a right of way to be hemmed in very closely by a hedge on one side and trees on the other side. So to the ability to actually to have an access in and out of it is a thing that improves social safety.
Sorry, Chairman, if I may, a point of information for officers. Basically, West Sussex County Council have got appropriate specs for a footpath that would be acceptable in all weathers. I suggest you look at the S106 agreement pertaining to, I believe it's DC 15/1084. It's a footpath that I pointed out to officers hadn't been covered by conditions. That footpath is passable in all weathers and it's fine for pushchairs and all the rest of it. I think that's a partial solution to your point.
Councillor, apologies, I don't want to interrupt, but I did have a point earlier, I mentioned it had slipped my mind. It has just come to me. Two things were mentioned, Councillor Fletcher. You mentioned, of course, the additional point of connection, which I think we've already discussed, but in addition you mentioned the surface composition of the right-of-way as well as an unbonded surface. At the moment, the recommendation within the officer's report is that in essence, that the detailed composition of the composition of the footway, as material composition, I should say, is reserved for latter consideration through an approval of details reserved by condition. So that bestows us some flexibility. Where some difficulties arise, if the intention is to pursue a bonded surface or a made surface suitable in all weathers, in particular, is that the County Highways Authority have indicated they wouldn't have the ability to maintain that through the comments expressed by the public's right of way team, which is why we've phrased the condition the way we currently have. There is an alternative approach, which would be to attach another condition, which would allow the agreement or an amendment to the agreed landscape management and maintenance plan to ensure that is specified as a hard surface to be maintained by the management company, and therefore that would allow for a right of way to be maintained in all weather conditions, etc., notwithstanding that West Sussex currently have indicated that they wouldn't be able to maintain it to that standard. So that's the potential resolution to that.
Thank you. Yes, I understood that issue, that as things stand, there's flexibility, but what's being sought is a standard footpath surface of gravel and fine dust and so on, which, albeit is theoretically all weather, I think that's highly disputable, particularly when you look at realistic maintenance schedules that occur for such paths. I'd originally thought it would be great to have a sealed surface there, but the point is that it has limited use for the site. So it may, I was taking the officer comment that it might not be something that you could actually reasonably require the management company to do. If during those discussions under the current conditions, it's open for that to happen, if that were possible to happen, it still seems reasonable that should be a matter that could be discussed. I was just taking a point that we couldn't actually require it. So if you think that we can word the conditions such that we explicitly leave that open, whilst understanding that it would only be feasible if the management company were to be happy to take that on, that sounds very reasonable to me.
Sorry, you can't pass notes to the members. Apologies. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick one, we'd be pleased to hear. I noticed that this is a DC 23 application number, so presumably it was entered before the Environment Act took place. So there's no mandatory BNG. However, 6.51 ends with saying delivers a proportionate biodiversity net gain. I am concerned that a member of the public has mentioned that there are storks possibly nesting there, and that there are endangered species of mice there. Has a proper biodiversity net gain or even an ecological study been undertaken on this site?
Yes, it has. In respect of biodiversity net gain, this is always where the difficulty in terms of terminology arises. So you're entirely correct. The proposal was made in 2023, so it's exempt from what we now understand as the statutory minimum biodiversity gain of 10%. What though policy 31 of the HPF requires in general as a proportionate ecological enhancement or some form of gain to be delivered by proposals outside of the completion of biodiversity metrics, etc. So what we have is a proposal which sets aside areas for ecological enhancement. There's significant planting proposed within the site. There's 120 trees, even without areas of shrub and hedgerow planting, for example. There are various recommendations set out within the species survey supporting the proposal in terms of measures to be delivered by the proposal. So the range of those measures are overall proportionate even if they aren't a 10% gain or percentage gain, if we might understand it now. So how?
Just to add to that, Councillor Knoll, biodiversity net gain is different to mitigation and the protection of protected species. So any development will need to demonstrate it's got an acceptable impact on protected wildlife, and that is separate to any ecological enhancements through BNG, whether that's mandatory or not. And so this has had all of those relevant ecological surveys and been assessed by our ecological consultants or in-house, as the case may be.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Croker. Thank you, Chair. Two things. I'd like to support Councillor Fletcher's idea for increasing accessibility to that path on the central portion of the development side. Secondly, I'd just like to check, did the officer say that that hedge will be maintained at 0.8 per metre? Okay. One's tempted to ask how often is it going to be maintained, but overgrown hedges are a bit of a problem where I live. So leave that one there. Thank you.
Okay, we have a proposal on a condition. Unfortunately, I didn't capture the wording of that condition, but
I
if you
think
could
because
repeat
I
that.
didn't give you any specific wording for that condition.
Nice, Councillor Fletcher.
So I'm looking for help here. So what I'm hoping to achieve here is that when in condition 2, that the approved details are after consideration of potential access from the middle of the path. I don't know how you'd word that. Just sort of opposite just north of plot 32, and that to make sure that the consideration of the surface includes looking at the option of a sealed surface to be maintained by the management company.
Thank you, I was trying to copy that down. We're just trying to find the actual condition.
Sorry, Councillor Fletcher, we're just seeing there's a number of conditions. We're just trying to work out which one's best your suggestions come under. So condition 2, as you say, details the details of the footpath. So that one could specify an access in relation to being able to access the kind of middle eastern part of the development.
To the north of plot 32.
To the north of plot 32. So we could add that requirement within condition 2. So all members are aware, so that's a gap in the hedge essentially. So those units could directly access the footpath and either go north or south. And then in terms of condition 8, this talks about the landscape and ecological management plan. So the condition as currently worded is a regulatory condition in that it's approved in accordance with those details. However, we suggest that's amended to say, notwithstanding the details submitted, a landscape and ecological management plan shall be submitted to and approved in writing. So then we can further consider the surfacing of the footpath and whether or not that sits under the management plan or not. Obviously, if you're just approving it as submitted, that precludes that possibility. Does that make sense, Councillor Fletcher? So it's an amendment to condition 2 and condition 8.
I defer to your professional abilities here, and yes, it sounds reasonable as far as I can tell.
As long as members are clear that Councillor Fletcher's proposal is to amend condition 2 to ensure there is a link to the west of plot 32, and for condition 8 to be the submission of a document rather than the approval of one in terms of the management plan. So I think I'm satisfied we can do the exact wording, but that motion sufficiently reflects what Councillor Fletcher was putting forward, if everybody's happy with that.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor Croker. All those in favour of that proposal?
Just for the condition.
For the condition, sorry, just for the condition.
Yes. No, circus.
Oh, so unanimous. Good.
That's 12-4.
12-4. No objections? No abstentions? 12-4. Okay, therefore that condition is agreed. Thank you. We now move to the actual planning application itself, and that is to approve, let me just get my wording correctly, is to approve planning permission. Let me just see, forgive me a moment, I'll be there. The wording to approve planning permission subject to appropriate conditions and completion of a section 106 legal agreement and the additional condition that we've just agreed. All those in favour?
That's 8-4.
Against? Any
Two
abstentions?
against.
Sorry, any abstentions?
And 2 abstentions.
Okay, therefore the permission is approved. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, officer. Thank you. Moving to item DC 240480 and DC 240481. The officer will present these jointly. Sorry.
Right.
Thank you. Just to repeat what I've said a moment ago, DC 240480 and DC 240481 will be presented jointly by the officer. We will take points from the public who requested to speak jointly as well, but when we come to vote, we shall be voting independently on each one. So the presentation will be a joint presentation by the officer. Members of the public who've requested to speak will be able to speak on both of these, and they will extend the time for them to do so. But when we actually take the vote on this, we will be voting individually on each application. Thank you. So I invite the officer to make their presentation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So yes, this presentation is for both applications, DC 240480 and 0481. And these applications seek full planning permission for detached residential dwellings, garages and greenhouses, referred to as Unit 2 and Unit 3 respectively. The application site has been subject of a recent refusal for similar development under planning reference DC 211240, and this refusal was subsequently appealed to the planning inspector, where the proposal was dismissed on the grounds of harm to the spacious rural character and distinctiveness of the countryside locality and insufficient information with respect to protected species and habitat, and these applications have sought to address those concerns. So just as an overview, the inspector did consider that the level of landscape harm would be low because the scale and form of the development would be consistent with neighbouring buildings and would reflect the built characteristics and proportions of the locality, but they did raise ecology concerns in regard to great crested newts and bats. The inspector, in applying the planning balance, recognised that the council could not demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply and that the development would result in a low level of harm to the character and appearance of the area. This harm was considered to attract moderate weight against the proposal, and significant weight was attached to the potential harm to identified protected species. Moderate weight was attracted to the benefits of the housing supply arising from the proposed development given our 5-year housing land supply state. But overall, it was concluded that the adverse impacts of granting planning permission would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. So going to the location plans, so Unit 2, so DC 240480 is on the left of that plan as arrowed, so it's the central area of the site, and DC 240481, referenced as Unit 3, is to the southern area of the site as arrowed. So the application sites are located to the south of Mill Lane, outside of any designated built-up area boundary, and the sites are therefore located within the countryside in policy terms. They're both located approximately 0.6 kilometres to the north of the built-up area of Partridge Green, and the planning inspector in that recent appeal considered that the site was previously developed land close to existing facilities and services within Partridge Green. So both sites comprise former paddock land that now contain grassland, with the sites located to the north, south and west of residential development, which comprises the unclassified settlement of Littleworth. The surrounding residential properties consist of a mix of chalet bungalows and 2-storey dwellings. So this slide shows the arrangement of the proposed developments for Unit 2, so being the central site under DC 240480 at the top, and then the southern site being DC 240481 at the bottom, so to the south of the site. And this shows the layout of the site, including the dwellings, the garages and the greenhouses, as well as the access. So this slide here shows the floor plans and elevations for Unit 2 under DC 240480, as well as the site plan again, just to give context that it's the central area there. This is for DC 240481, so the southern portion of the site referred to as Unit 3. And then these are the floor and elevation plans of the garages and the greenhouses for both applications. So going to the photographs of the site, at the top there you can see the photos of the site access taken from Mill Lane, as well as internally on the right there, going into that central area of the site. And then the middle photos show Unit 2 being that central site, and then Unit 3 being the southern area. So the current applications have sought to address the concerns raised by the previous refusal and appeal dismissal. This includes a reduction in the height of both dwellings, so that both of the dwellings would now be similar in height to other dwellings within the vicinity. Additional information in respect of ecology has also been provided, and conditions are recommended to require the submission of further details in reference to great crested newts and hazel dormouse, and those are listed within section 7 of the report. So the council are currently unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, where the proposal would make a modest contribution to housing within the district. The planning inspector previously considered that the site is within reasonable distance to local facilities and services, as well as bus stops serving the wider area, where all of these benefits attract moderate weight in favour of the proposal. While it is recognised that a degree of landscape harm would continue to result from the developments, as previously concluded by the planning inspector, this is considered to be a low level of harm, and ecology matters have been addressed, as well as water neutrality. In applying the tilted balance under paragraph 11D of the MPPF, it is no longer considered that the developments would result in a level of harm that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the new dwellings, and therefore the applications are both recommended for approval, subject to the conditions in section 7 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Invite Paul Vincent to speak. You have 4 minutes, Mr. Vincent, and you can speak on both applications. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I'll make it clear if I'm talking about one rather than the other for the benefit of the voting later. So thank you for your attention this evening. It's been a long evening. My name's Paul. I live in Honeycroft, which when you look at these properties is the closest property and arguably the most impacted by the proposal. Until now, Horsham District Council have refused permission, as was mentioned, to build on this land due to the semi-rural nature, and for all intents and purposes, and it's been mentioned this evening by the planning officer, that this is in the countryside. So the 4 houses that surround this paddock rely upon this unoccupied land to maintain the rural nature of the area. Myself, my wife, my son Jude and our dog Max, we moved here 2 years ago away from Southwater, which we felt was becoming overdeveloped. We moved here specifically because of this piece of land that was unoccupied, and we knew it was in the countryside, and we knew for the last 5 years that multiple planning applications had been made, and Horsham District Council on all occasions had said no to them, even on multiple appeals, on the basis that this was in the countryside and it would drastically affect the neighbourhood and the rural nature of this particular area. This is something in the appeal that was mentioned. We don't feel that the tilt of the balance has been enough when you look at this. So to the animals, we've seen bats in the trees, we've seen woodpeckers in the oak trees, which have TPOs against them in my garden. We've seen badgers on these land, foxes, great crested newts we've seen, and we see deers running across this land that the planning proposal will get rid of. My son loves animals and he enjoys watching them, and he does that by camping in our front garden. Sorry, there's no storks. I might look out for them though, in case they're nesting there. Which brings me nicely onto privacy. So, as the closest neighbour and arguably the family that's most impacted, the proposed development will build a house that is just 4 metres away from our front garden, and it will be 5.5 metres high. Right at the closest point, it extends to 6.5 metres at its southernmost elevation. This will significantly impact the privacy of our front garden and light into the same area. Additionally, the garage that's been proposed, which is also 5.5 metres tall for a garage, that's going to be right next to our front garden. And that again is going to significantly impact the outlook. There's a proposal to put trees which will be 2 metres high, but as you can tell from what I've just said in the elevation pictures, they're not going to protect us from the privacy loss. It would need to be a lot higher than that. And obviously not to mention the significant noise that will take place during the building works. And then finally, the danger of the access roads. As you come out of Honeycroft, there is a fence that makes a blind bend. There's a small mirror that the developer has put up. But the reason that that's been put up is because we've almost had a very serious accident where my dog ran out in front of a Amazon delivery driver who was driving at high speed down this single track gravel road, completely blind. You can't see anything that is coming out of there. So I had to shout, this is all on CCTV, I had to shout to the Amazon driver, I had to get in the way and stop him. He screeched to a halt, skidded, locked all 4 wheels up. Dog was safe, fortunately. But if we build more houses here, that's just going to happen more often. You're going to have Amazon delivery drivers, going up and down there at high speed. Horsham District Council, the waste guys, they drive up there too quickly. They skidded before and hit my front gates. So I would say it was highly inappropriate for more houses to be built in this area, and less significant thought needs to be put into this. We also have a waste disposal unit that pumps the foul waste to the top of the road. It's always getting blocked. It's not really up for the job. We see Southern Water there probably 2 or 3 times a month dealing with it. None of those issues have been addressed with any of the plans. So I respectfully would ask Horsham District Council to continue to refuse planning permission and avoid destroying this lovely piece of countryside we all rely upon in Mill Lane. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David Green, you have 10 minutes should you need to.
Yeah. Okay. I've been a West Grinstead Parish Councillor for over 20 years now. I've been a member of its planning committee throughout that period. And almost throughout that period, we've been receiving applications from this applicant. The first one that I could actually trace was 2001. There've probably been something like 50 since. Nearly all have been refused. Some have been appealed. Again, nearly all were turned down. The reasons have remained much the same. Horsham has consistently objected to these applications. Development in the countryside, outside any defined built-up area, unacceptable harm to rural setting. The office already referred to DC 211240, an application for 3 dwellings. I mean, in that report, she says, while it was recognised that the council could not demonstrate a 5-year housing supply, the contribution of 3 dwellings to the housing shortfall was considered to be very modest. It was considered that the adverse impacts to the landscape character, sense of place and rural ambience would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits arising from the modest contribution of the development. Now that went to appeal. Basically, the inspector agreed with HDC. So what we know, therefore, is that as recently as 2022, HDC was prepared to defend sites such as this, despite the fact that at the time there was a lack of a 5-year supply. And we know also that it was actually able to defend them at appeal. So what in heaven's name has changed such that they're prepared to recommend that these 2 applications be granted? This application doesn't meet all the FAD criteria, as the officer concedes in her report. I should perhaps also explain that the property isn't in Partridge Green, it's in Littleworth. It's an unclassified settlement in the current local plan. It'll be a secondary settlement in the new one. And the last secondary settlement boundary map I saw, this property isn't included in it. Technically, the property is classed as being in the countryside, if I understand it correctly. So if HDC is going to grant applications such as this, one wonders where it's all going to end. Any application for a new house in the countryside would be fair game, or so it seems to me anyway. It would set a very dangerous precedent. I remember asking a planning officer some years ago whether, if HDC no longer had a 5-year supply, that meant you could effectively disregard everything in the current plan. And I was told that that's not what it meant. You apply the tilted balance test, and if there are good reasons to refuse an application, you can still do so. Now, we believe that there are such reasons in this case. In fact, we believe that if you concede this application, you'll not just be betraying West Grinstead Parish, you're probably going to be betraying every rural parish in the district. Because, you know, if there aren't applications for single units in the countryside now, then there will be in the future, at least until the new local plan is approved. So we would urge you, please, to refuse these two applications. I guess you may not have actually considered reasons for doing so, but I think they're there. The one that we've used quite frequently in the past, and I think, to be honest, we just plagiarized reasons granted by HDC. So you would only be quoting what you yourselves have cited as reasons more than once in the past. The proposed development, due to its scale, quantum and form, would fail to reflect the landscape characteristics and intrinsic features of the landscape area, and would detract from the ambience and sense of place of the rural countryside setting by formalizing and urbanizing the rural landscape character. The proposed dwelling would be of a scale, mass and bulk that would over-dominate the backland setting and fail to reflect or reinforce the built characteristics and proportions of the locality. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, my colleague has referenced the previous appeal, and whilst I note comments were made in speakers in terms of privacy and the access, obviously that was considered by the previous inspector and wasn't raised as a matter to refuse. Generally, front gardens aren't expected to have the same level as amenity as you would for a back garden where you'd have your patio, etc. In terms of wildlife, obviously that the ecology impacts were a reason for refusal last time round and supported appeal. However, this time we have additional information and our ecologists are satisfied, subject to the recommended conditions. Obviously, there has been some history on this site, which has been referenced. We did have a recent appeal. Could you point to the barn conversion one?
The stable building.
Stable building. So we had a recent appeal that was allowed here where we raised concerns in terms of the sustainability of the site, and that appeal was lost. It was allowed. So there is a views from the inspector both within that appeal and the previous one that the site is in a reasonably suitable location. Whether that's our view or not, that is an established principle through the inspectorate. Obviously, the previous inspector did raise concerns in terms of a level of harm. But as my colleague said, there's mention of a low level of harm in terms of landscape and obviously a much greater level of harm in terms of ecology. Now that ecology concern has been addressed through this application. So, and as the tilted balance is applied, members will need to consider whether any level of harm is significant to outweigh the benefits as in the tilted balance. So it is a finely balanced application, but the officer's recommendation, having considered the level of harm, the previous inspector's decisions, our lack of 5-year housing land supply, and on balance are recommending approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There are no ward councillors here. I'm taking DC 240480 first. Are there any comments? Councillor van der Burg.
Thank you, Chairman. I had a look at this on Google Earth for a good while today. It's a little bit, I'm just curious, it looks like these are infilling in a sense rather than country. Both sites are surrounded or pretty much surrounded by existing dwellings. So, and also I note those two huge houses to the south of the development. I mean, they're plonked in the middle of some fairly significant fields. I mean, if those things are permitted, I struggle to find why we can't permit these two that are essentially infilling.
Thank you.
Councillor van der Burg, just those big houses were lost on appeal, a previous appeal. So those, as you say, they are there. It's important to recognise in policy terms this is in the countryside, because it's outside of a defined built-up area boundary. So there is conflict with the development plan there. However, there are material considerations which we have to consider, which are the relevant appeal decisions, our lack of a 5-year housing land supply. So that, you know, we are in a position, obviously, if we had a 5-year housing land supply, we'd be seeking to resist this. But we don't, and we have appeal decisions as well that indicate the site is acceptable for some residential development. So it's all those matters together that members need to consider, and I recognise it's a tricky one. Thank you.
Sorry, could just to clarify, those two to the south were refused by the council and then lost on appeal, is that correct?
Yes, that's
So,
my
so the inspectorate approved those?
Yes.
Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. Slightly different topic, but aspect of this rather. Water neutrality. It's interesting in that it's using rainwater harvesting and some as yet unspecified water treatment method, which I presume will be conditioned. Okay, thank you. However, it all seems to rely on averages, and as a lot of people in Central Europe are finding out at the moment, averages don't always work. So I have genuine concerns around that, and I'd find it difficult to support. Quite how those get addressed, I'm not sure really. Because I understand that Natural England are happy with it. Okay, I'll just leave those concerns there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Circus.
I think Emma Parks has put her finger on it. Really, this is an unacceptable application, and is only made unacceptable by the absence of a 5-year land supply, which gets me asking the question, does this committee need to meet, or shall we go into suspension until we have a 5-year land supply? We could take a year off, because we don't really need to evaluate these applications. If it's a simple fact that these things are acceptable because we don't have a 5-year land supply, why don't we wait until we've got a 5-year land supply? Meanwhile, we'll take a well-deserved holiday. I think it's a well-deserved holiday. Perhaps the officers would like to comment on that. But I know we have won cases in front of the inspector in the past when we haven't had a 5-year land supply. So it seems to me, joking apart, that it is possible to win in front of the inspector. I know we can, because we've done it in the past. It seems to me, unacceptable. It's also the truth that if you go through, there's a lot of indications that there's still a deficiency of information on a number of points. And if one was going to seriously look at approving this, I think one could reasonably adjourn for one cycle to try and get at least some of the information that currently seems to be lacking. Could I just ask if the officers could give me, clarify a couple of points? In the third paragraph under 3.2, it talks about the ground having the potential to be contaminated. I'm not quite sure what the word potential in this context means. Do we mean the ground could be contaminated? Is that what we mean? If it is, I'm not sure in the past when we've had developments. I think environmental health have gone out or organised somebody else to go out and do appropriate tests to determine whether it is contaminated. Because if it is contaminated, there's obviously some serious contamination clearance that is needed. And also it talks about, in the response from environmental health, a suitably competent person. What is a suitably competent person? Who decides what a suitably competent person is? Is it somebody within the council? Is it somebody externally that you can see what I'm getting at? I would like some idea what environmental health mean by a suitably competent person. Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of your first point regarding contamination, yes, potential is that it could be contaminated. So we have recommended a condition, it's condition number 4, that requires them to undertake a preliminary contamination risk assessment. And if it's found to be contaminated, there are other steps that need to be undertaken in terms of an intrusive investigation, a remediation and a verification report. In terms of your second point regarding a suitably competent and qualified consultant, so condition 9 that's recommended deals with the water sampling and a maintenance and management plan for the rainwater harvesting. The first point in that condition says that it must be undertaken by a DWI certified sampler and analysed by a UCAS accredited lab. Generally that's what's required by the condition and would be expected.
Just to comment on the point around lack of 5-year housing land supply, you're right, Councillor Serkis, that we can defend some sites if they're considered to be unacceptable. But equally, you know, we have approved a number of sites, including single houses, where there are particular circumstances that mean it's acceptable with our lack of 5-year housing land supply. So each case is assessed on its own merits. There are particular circumstances here which obviously officers feel justifies a recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Any other further comments? Councillor Knoll.
Just clarification, please, on the point that my colleague next to me made. On page 90, at the end of 3.3 environmental health, what does that last sentence mean? While the information provided is not, it does not meet this requirement. I don't understand what you're talking about. It's obviously a typographical error, but I'm not quite sure what it's referring to.
Could you repeat where exactly that is, Councillor Knoll?
Sorry?
Could you repeat where exactly that is?
Yeah, the final sentence
on
3.3 on the first, on 0480, page 90, the top of page 90. I'm not quite. This is all to do with the water neutrality, the water quality testing for environmental health. It's lost me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so what it's meant to say is while the information provided is noted, because they did provide some supporting information about a maintenance and management plan to do with the rainwater harvesting,
Yep.
but the environmental health officer didn't consider that that was adequate to meet the requirements of the condition. So we went back to them and have subsequently agreed that the condition needs to be imposed in order to secure the level of detail and the level of requirement to
Okay,
meet
so
the
you're not
specification.
satisfied with it at the moment?
Yeah, that's right, and that's why
Okay.
the condition is recommended.
Understand. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, BC 240480. The recommendation is to approve planning permission subject to the appropriate conditions. All those who approve that or in favour of that, please raise your arms.
That's
4 for.
Okay, all those against?
Six against
Any abstentions?
and 2 abstentions.
Okay, that's refused, isn't it?
Yep.
Therefore, the application,
The motion's failed.
yes,
So you need an alternative motion.
okay, apologies.
Yeah.
Therefore, the motion has failed. We now need an alternative motion. Councillor Troller.
May I suggest that we vote on the second one as well, because probably any subsequent, assuming the result is the same, probably any recommended actions will be the same as well, so we can discuss the two at the same time.
No, we need to do one at a time, Councillor Troller.
Okay, just an idea.
We can. So we need an alternative motion for this particular.
It's in the countryside, isn't it? Appropriate.
Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. I'd suggest that we use the statement from the previous failed appeal, or one of the previous failed appeals. It was we consider that the adverse impacts to the landscape character, sense of place and rural ambience would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits arising from the modest contribution of the development.
Councillor Croker, could you just repeat it and say it slowly, please? Thank you.
Sorry. It's actually 2.12 of your report, but while it was we consider that the adverse impacts to the landscape character, sense of place and rural ambience would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits arising from the modest contribution of the development.
Yeah, that's it.
Do we have a seconder for that motion? Okay, Councillor Finnegan. Okay, we now need to vote on that motion. All those in favour of that motion?
Eight for.
All those against?
That's 4 against
Any abstentions?
and no abstentions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, therefore the motion to refuse has been carried. Thank you. Now we're moving to DC 240481. Vote on this particular item. The recommendation from the officers is that this is, let me find my wording, sorry. To approve planning commission subject to appropriate conditions. All those in favour of approving this application?
That's 4 for.
All those against? Any abstentions?
Two abstentions.
Okay. Do we have a proposal?
For an alternative motion.
Yeah, alternative motion, sorry, thank you very much.
That's right. Right.
Yeah, repeat.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so councillor Finnegan, all those in favour?
Yep.
All those,
8.
okay,
8 for.
all those against?
4 against.
Any abstentions?
And no abstentions.
Okay, therefore the application as per the motion has been refused. Thank you. Moving on to item number 9. I've done number, apologies, moving on to item number 10. Forgive me. No urgent messages from myself. Therefore, I'd like to thank the officers for their comprehensive reports this evening, the presentations and contributions by everybody, and for the members for being patient, and the members of the public who are leaving. Had to wait some time before the committee made their decisions. Okay, and at 20:41, I bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much. Thank you.